Right, welcome to this very rough and ready video. The aim of this is to explain to you and make sure you're absolutely clear how to organise your GEO4 report on Friday. What we're going to do is going to talk through all the different sections, what you need to include and how to organise it. We won't go through actually any sort of actual facts or anything like that, but it's a structure. If you get the structure right, you'll be absolutely sorted. So we're going to assume we're going to look at a question looking at the importance of economic development, how important economic development is in understanding in health risk. So, if we're coming over, that's the question. First thing we want to do is think about our intro. Now, you want some sort of throwaway fact, you want some piece of information, perhaps to start it off. So you might look at the massive variation, for example, in life expectancy. If you do this, what you need to do is not just throw that fact in, you've then got to actually explain why that fact is important. How does it link to the question? You probably then want to come on to defining key terms. One of the most important ones is going to be health. Now you want to know the World Health Organization about health, but absolutely, most likely at least, the most critical is going to be defining what we actually mean by health risk. Now the health risk is the, if you like, the effects of the disease, of the pollution. So that's more than just the number of people who die, the mortality rate. That would also include the morbidity rate, the number of people who are sick, but it would also include the economic effects, the impacts it has on people's quality of life. You might want to think about the idea of DALYs there, so life-adjusted quality years. You certainly want to think about the impact on quality of life in the family and friends of people around it. Now, once you've highlighted that, what you've then got to do, really importantly, is you've got to pick out the health risk equation. Now, that's a good idea, which is that the first time you write health risk equation, you put bracket, HRE, close bracket, and then if you need to refer to it, you can refer to it as HRE later on. With the equation, really important to think about the fact that this is going to be how you go about explaining your ideas through your report. So you do want to explain what we mean by the health hazard, by the vulnerability and by the capacity. And certainly looking at many of your reports, you're not mentioning these ideas, this idea of vulnerability, this idea of capacity and the hazard itself. Once you've actually defined what we mean by health risk, the next thing you want to do is talk about types of health risk. And one of the best ways of doing this is to link to your models. So use your models at this point, the epidemiological transition model and the environmental risk transition model, and refer to them and use that to define the different types of health risks. And obviously the types of health risks are going to be infectious, degenerative, you'll get those from the epidemiological transition model, and pollution might be mesoscale, global, local. You might also want to talk about point and diffuse, sustained and instant at this point. Once you've got the definition of health out of the way, the next thing we need to look at, because we're fairly certain this is going to come up in the exam or be in the question, is economic development. You need to have a definition of economic development. You might see it as a traditional sort of view of development. You might talk about how this is related to GDP per capita, but also you may take into account occupation structure. So for example, the percentage of people in primary, secondary, tertiary jobs. And that may be something you can pick out later when you're looking at impacts. For example, if we're looking at Sierra Leone and we're talking about the impact it had on food security, or even Haiti with cholera and food security, because of low levels of economic, because of that primary dependency, that may be something that comes out. You probably want to then talk about human development and how actually development is far more than economic development. And you might want to draw a development cable there, or at least mention this idea of human development. But you must then, whatever happens, talk about the fact that development is not as simple as north-south. It's more complicated than MEDC, LEDC, and there's a whole continuum. And as a result, that's one of the reasons why particularly India has to be one of your case studies. Now, you may already have done this in the introduction, and in fact, the focus either comes at this point or right at the start with that throwaway fact. But you basically have to explain what the title is all about. What do I need to do to answer that question? And that's what we mean by the focus. So in this question, to answer it, what you have to do is you have to look at a range of different case studies from a range of levels of different developments, from a range of different health risks, and you need to pick out what are the key factors linked to economic development, what are the key factors not linked to economic development, the relative importance of them and how they interact. We then come on to the methodology. Methodology two-part framework. The framework is basically how you're going to answer it. What case study you're going to look at, in what order and why. And the key here is refer back to your models. Your models all show that the health risk will change as a country develops. Therefore, your framework is probably going to say something quite simple. It's going to say something like, to answer this question, you're going to look at a range of case studies from across the development continuum. You're also going to look at the different types of health risks, pollution, infectious, degenerative, and you're going to look at a range of scales to make sure you've got a balance there. That's pretty much all you need to say. One short paragraph, get on with it. When we then come down, okay, to the next part, we're looking at sources. Sources, again, you've got a paragraph in your pack. Here, all you need to do is you need to say that basically you're going to look at a range of sources. Where possible, you're going to need to use reliable sources, peer-reviewed journals, WHO reports, etc. But you also get marks for using a range of sources. So you want some video, maybe Al Jazeera or BBC documentaries. You also want some newspapers in there. And you might talk about how you're using these, even though they're less reliable, because they provide more qualitative information and more detail. And that's the introduction done. When you then get on to the next section, you want to think about how you're going to structure this. So in the main section, okay, I've called this X.1, you want to have your introduction. Your introduction to each section might have the following information. You're going to introduce a country. You might want to think about GDP, life expectancy, maybe even doxer per 1,000. You can find that very easily on something like the CIA website. You need to tell me the nature of the hazard. Is it degenerative? Is it infectious? Is it a virus? Is it bacteria? Is it a pollution source? Is it point source? It doesn't need to be long, but you do need to clarify what type of hazard we're doing. And we want to know what the health risks are, what the effects are. That'll be things like cost, that'll be things like mortality, number of people dead, morbidity, but it might also be effects in terms of food security, it might be effects in terms of quality of life. Once you've done that, the next bit really depends on what the question is. And you want to use the same language that the exam question uses. So if the question asks about risk factors, then use the word risk factors. If it asks for causes, use the word causes. How you do this is up to you, but you may well want to split them up into a specific question link or a specific section linking to economic development. So what risk factors link to economic development, and then factors that don't link to economic development. But this, along with the focus, is the bit you need to think about and carefully plan. Once you've actually got the plan, it's quite straightforward, and if you get the right headings, it will basically force you to answer the question. You then need to have an evaluation. Now, if you're clever, what you can actually do to save you a bit of time is you can actually do infectious disease 1, say HIV, infectious disease 2, say cholera, and then have a sort of mini conclusion which sums up infectious diseases in LEDCs. You can do the same for degenerative diseases, so you can compare skin cancer in Australia with Alzheimer's in the UK. That might all save you time. For India, you probably can't. You probably just need one that sums up the different aspects of India. One thing that we do need to try and do a little bit more of is referencing. Two ways of doing this. It could simply be something like the WHO says or reports, or it can be a main cause of something is something, bracket bbc.co.uk, and where you can, try and give the dates. But try and get one or two referenced sources into each case study as a minimum. Finally, when we come to conclusion, just a couple of things to remember. Just focus on the big ideas. You do not introduce any new ideas here. You don't need to include lots of facts. You're referring back to the mini conclusions at the end of each section. Make sure you think about a structure. If you haven't got a structure for the conclusion in your head, you're going to waffle. So a typical structure might be something like this. Start off by talking about how economic development is really important. You might then think about vulnerability and how it links to that. Think about capacity. You might then want to go on to think about what factors are not linked to economic. So, for example, genetics, important in heart disease in India, in skin cancer being white, for example, even Alzheimer's possible. Physical factors, earthquakes, for example, in Haiti, climate and relief in Haina. Lifestyle is actually something you might want to think about. And then the other thing, which is probably worth thinking about, and is arguably as important as economic development is think about the disease. The disease is something that very often you guys are not mentioning. And yet, if you think about it, it doesn't matter if you're in a rich or a poor country. If you've got a cold, it's not going to kill you. If you get Ebola, you've got problems. So, you do want to evaluate the role of disease. That's really important. Now, I hope this has been helpful. I'll put this on Edmodo and YouTube. But don't forget, you still have a chance. If you want to write some of these sections, I'm more than happy for you to do that. Get them to me, and I will have a look at them. Any problems, contact me. Good luck, guys.